The Isaiah Code that anticipated the end of times. When we open the pages of the Bible and encounter the book of Isaiah, we find ourselves faced with one of the most complex, fascinating, and, at the same time, controversial texts in all of religious literature. Isaiah is not simply a prophet who made predictions. He is a figure whose language, symbolism, and narratives have intrigued scholars, theologians, and the curious for over 2,700 years. But what makes Isaiah so special? Why do his words continue to generate heated debate among academics, religious figures, and researchers around the world? The answer lies in a phenomenon we can call the Isaiah Code, a set of seemingly coded messages, powerful symbols, and narratives that, when analyzed in depth, appear to anticipate apocalyptic events and the end of times in surprisingly detailed fashion. This article aims to explore these controversial stories clearly, always seeking a balance between literal and symbolic interpretation, between traditional theological views and more contemporary interpretations. The controversial book, who was Isaiah, after all? Before delving into the mysteries of the Isaiah Code, we need to understand who this historical figure was. According to biblical and historical records, Isaiah lived in Jerusalem during the 8th and 7th centuries BC, during an extremely turbulent period in Israel's history. It was a time when the Assyrian and Babylonian empires were expanding their domains, constantly threatening the kingdom of Judah. The first controversial point arises here. Modern scholars fervently debate the book's authorship. Some argue that the book of Isaiah was actually written by multiple authors at different times. They divide the work into three main parts. First, Isaiah chapters 1 to 39. Second, Isaiah chapters 40 to 55. And third, Isaiah chapters 56 to 66. This theory is called Trito-Isaiah and has generated immense academic debate. Traditional Christian and Jewish scholars, however, insist that Isaiah, son of Amos, was indeed the author of the entire work, composing its messages throughout his prophetic life. Regardless of authorship, what matters is the message. Isaiah presents a vision of the future that is simultaneously terrifying and hopeful. He not only predicts catastrophes, he also presents promises of redemption and restoration. Apocalyptic symbols. The code in action. To understand Isaiah's code, we need to understand that the prophet did not speak in direct, modern language. He used symbols, metaphors, and visions. In Isaiah chapter 24, we find one of the most controversially apocalyptic passages in the entire Bible. The text describes a day when the earth will be completely devastated. Behold, the Lord is coming to turn the earth upside down and destroy it, and to upend its face, and to scatter its inhabitants abroad. Isaiah 24:1. Scholars have fiercely debated the meaning of this passage. Some interpret it as a literal prediction of the end of the planet. Others argue that it is a poetic description of the collapse of human civilizations. But when we read further, we see Isaiah describing scenes that seem straight out of a science fiction film. The earth will be utterly desolate and utterly desolate, for the Lord has spoken this word. Isaiah 24:3. What is controversial here? Critics ask, how could an 8th century BC prophet so vividly describe events that, according to Christian fundamentalists, are yet to come? How can this apparent accuracy be explained? Catastrophes described by Isaiah, fact or fiction? Isaiah chapter 13 presents a prophecy against Babylon that uses language so extreme and shocking that it makes even modern readers uncomfortable. The prophet describes, the day of the Lord is coming. It is near. He is coming with wrath and fierce anger to make the land desolate and to take away its sinners. Isaiah 13:9, the passage continues with descriptions of absolute darkness, stars ceasing to shine, and cosmic chaos that defies rational explanation. The controversial point here is Isaiah actually describing real cosmic events, or is he using poetic hyperbole to condemn Babylon for its oppression? Progressive theologians argue that this is apocalyptic language typical of Hebrew prophetic literature, dramatic way of expressing divine judgment on pagan nations. On the other hand, literalist interpreters insist that these are predictions of real events that will characterize the end times. There is a third, growing group of scholars who propose that Isaiah was describing specific historical events of his time using apocalyptic language, but that this same imagery was subsequently reinterpreted by later generations as having application to the end times. The suffering servant, the most controversial of predictions. Possibly the most controversial passage in the entire book of Isaiah is chapters 52 and 53, which introduce the concept of the suffering servant. This passage is so controversial that it literally divided Christianity from Judaism. Christians read this passage as a literal prediction of Jesus Christ, despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief, and as one who hides his face. He is despised, and we have no account of him. Isaiah Lima Politica. The passage goes on to describe someone who suffers for the sins of others, is put to death, is laid in a rich man's tomb, and yet pleases the Lord. For traditional Christianity, this is clearly a prophecy of Jesus Christ, written 700 years before his birth. Jews, however, interpret the suffering servant not as an individual, but as a collective representation of the people of Israel, who were suffering persecution at the hands of pagan nations. For them, applying this prophecy to Jesus is a later Christian interpretation that was not the original understanding. Here, a genuinely controversial question arises. Who is right? How can we determine the original interpretation? Is there a correct answer? Or are these all valid interpretations depending on the religious context? The Apocalypse according to Isaiah, the signs of the end? Isaiah devotes considerable space to describing the signs that will accompany the end of time. In chapter 24, he paints a picture of total collapse, environmental catastrophes. The land would be filled with blood, and mourning would be increased. Food production failure, the wine perishes, the vine withers. All who had a merry heart sigh. Social disorder, he has left the city in turmoil. Every house is shut, so that no one can enter. When we read these descriptions today, it's impossible not to notice the similarities to contemporary problems. Climate change, food crises, social unrest all are described there in the words of an ancient prophet, but is it really a prophecy? Or was Isaiah simply describing the natural consequences of injustice, idolatry, and greed problems that existed in his time and continue to exist? The mystery of the rapture. Did Isaiah really predict it? There is a passage in Isaiah 26, minutes and 19 seconds to 20, that Christian fundamentalists often cite as a prophecy of the rapture, the Christian concept that true believers will be suddenly removed from the earth before the end of time. Your dead will live, and our corpses will be raised. Awake and sing, you who dwell in the dust, for your dew is like the dew of the morning, and the earth will give birth to her dead. Controversial critics, however, argue that this is a prophecy of literal resurrection, a concept that was not as developed in Hebrew theology as it later became. Aramaic and Greek greatly influenced the concept of physical resurrection that we see in later writings. Role reversal. The last shall be first. One of the most disturbing themes in Isaiah is the idea of cosmic reversal, that at the end of time, familiar, social, economic, and political structures will be completely upended. The rich will become poor, the powerful will become weak, and those who have been rejected will be exalted. This is controversial because it appears to be a reaffirmation of values that society often rejects. But it is also deeply hopeful for those who suffer injustice. Isaiah speaks of a world where justice will spring from the earth and peace will flourish. Visions and altered states of consciousness. A fascinating question that contemporary scholars raise is, how did Isaiah receive these visions? In chapter 6, the prophet describes a visionary experience in the temple where he sees the Lord in glory and hears heavenly voices. It is described in terms that suggest an altered state of consciousness. The controversy arises when we ask, was this a genuine mystical experience? A hallucination? An experience of profound meditation? Different religious traditions respond differently. What is certain is that this experience transformed Isaiah and permanently marked him as a prophet. The role of nature in Isaiah's apocalypse, unlike some apocalyptic texts that focus on abstract astronomical symbols, Isaiah often describes environmental collapse in a very tangible and real way. He speaks of severe droughts that destroy crops and kill livestock, earthquakes that move mountains and change landscapes, darkness that covers the earth like never before, diseases and plagues that afflict entire populations. The code of Isaiah that anticipated the end of times. The controversial thing is that these descriptions sound incredibly current. Reading Isaiah in light of modern environmental crises, one can interpret him as a prophet who somehow managed to glimpse what would happen when a civilization lived in disharmony with nature. The question of free will versus predestination. One of the greatest theological debates emerging from Isaiah is, if the prophet predicted the future with such precision, does that mean the future is already predetermined? If God revealed to the prophet what will happen, do we still have free will to choose changes? Of course. Isaiah confronts predestination when, in chapter 45, he has the Lord say, I am the Lord, and there is no other. There is no God besides me. I gird you, though you have not known me. This is deeply controversial. How can we reconcile a vision of a fully prophesied future with the human capacity to make free choices? Messianic hope. More than just judgment. Despite all the apocalyptic and judgmental language, Isaiah is not just a book of curses, it is also a book of immense hope. The prophet describes a messianic future where a perfect leader comes to restore justice. And the moon shall be no more, for the Lord shall be your everlasting light. For the days of your mourning are ended. Isaiah 60, banding 20. Descriptions of this restored world paint an almost paradisiacal picture. Lions eat straw like oxen, children play with poisonous snakes without danger, and justice flows like an inexhaustible river. The controversy arises in interpreting when and how this will be fulfilled. Is it future? Already partially initiated? Is it literal or symbolic? Modern interpretations. The code rediscovered. Recently, scholars using computational methods have attempted to find hidden codes in the text of Isaiah, especially in the original Hebrew. The theory, the discovery of the Bible codes, has generated enormous controversy. Some claim to have found references to modern historical events encoded in the ancient text. Critics dismiss this as textual pareidolia, the tendency to find patterns in random data. But the phenomenon remains intriguing to many, raising profound questions about how ancient texts can continue to reveal new meanings. The legacy of the code, why Isaiah continues to matter. Even for those who are not religious, the book of Isaiah offers something valuable, a profound reflection on the nature of moral judgment, the consequences of our collective actions, and the possibility of redemption and restoration. Whether literal or symbolic, apocalyptic or poetic, Isaiah forces us to confront eternal questions about justice, power, suffering, and hope. Conclusion. The mystery remains. The Isaiah Code, which supposedly anticipated the end of time, remains one of the greatest mysteries in religious literature. There is no universal interpretation that satisfies all questions. What exists is an ongoing dialogue between traditions, between readers, between past and present. The true value of Isaiah may not lie in knowing whether he truly prophesied the future with literal accuracy. Perhaps it lies in recognizing that this ancient work continues to speak to us, continues to challenge us to think about the meaning of history, the nature of justice, and the possibility of a better world. Whether you are a fundamentalist believer who sees in this a true divine prediction, a scholar studying ancient semiotics, a liberal theologian seeking metaphorical meanings, or someone merely interested in history and literature, Isaiah offers abundant material for contemplation. The code remains partially deciphered, and perhaps that is exactly how it should be, leaving room for each generation to discover its own meanings, in the words of a prophet who lived nearly 3,000 years ago, but whose voice continues to echo through the centuries. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss future videos, and don't forget to like it. Bye.